All right. Are we live? We're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to day 5. Well, actually, technically day 4 of AI Build Week. Yesterday's session was on automation, but we pushed it to Monday. So make sure you sign up if you haven't. And if you have, we'll see you there, same time and same place. Well, similar place. So this week in AI Build Week, we've had jam-packed sessions each day. We started off the week with Angelique on the DevRel team, and now we have the lovely Keenan here. So welcome back, Keenan.
Yeah,
If
thanks, Sarah. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. So in case you also missed this, in the community, we have a lot of threads going on for each day of AI Build Week. So if you're just jumping in, make sure to check those out. We'll post them in the chat here. And we have polls and questions and all of the Q&A that Keenan does each day. We've been summarizing it and posting it in there so you can read along and ask more follow-up questions. And we also have some prizes and giveaways and some fun stuff. So a few notes about today. You see the chat, Taylor on the DevRel team. He's already posting in the chat, so make sure you check out those messages. And also you can use the Q&A function in Zoom, and Keenan will get to it in after the presentation. Or you can type them in the chat as well. So to kick us off, everyone share where are you joining in from and how many sessions have you made it to this week? So let us know in the chat and I will pass it over to Keenan. Bye.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, it's super cool to see and all the days we've done so far this week, everybody just kind of chiming in all sorts of different time zones. I've seen from folks from, across the US, seen some from the Philippines, Europe. It's really cool. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. And thanks for joining us. So like Sarah mentioned, today is the Friday of Build Week. And we are going to take a look at how to build AI agents in Retool. So let's go ahead and just dive in. Like Sarah mentioned before we start, I just want to remind everybody that in the chat in Zoom or in the Zoom Q&A, feel free to post questions as we're going along. We'll have plenty of time for those at the end. We want to make sure that we get everyone's questions answered. That's why y'all showed up live today. So appreciate it, and let's dive in. Cool. So this is a question that's on lots of folks' minds. I feel like this is something that's talked about a lot. It's like, okay, ChatGPT has been out for 2 or 3 years now, but there's this evolution of like people are talking about AI agents and what's going on and what is actually an AI agent. It's a little bit of a tough thing to define. So tools like ChatGPT and Claude are really great and very helpful in lots of different cases. I use them every day for one thing or another. But there's kind of a gap where they sort of fall short sometimes with actually helping you do things. They're happy to be conversational partners with you, thought partners with you, but their ability to take action has historically like been pretty limited. It's expanding a little bit, but even still, they're kind of contained to that sort of chat box, chat interface that they're in. And so with some of the growing demands on AI, what a lot of people want is AI that can actually help them do things. If you think of like Jarvis from Iron Man, for example, it's able to hook into all of the different systems and databases and all that stuff that Tony Stark has, and actually do work kind of on his behalf. And ChatGPT and tools like that are getting there, but there's still, a long ways to go. And so that's where the idea of AI agents come in. And a lot of people have dubbed 2025 the year of AI agents. And, we're a little over halfway in now to the year. And it remains to be seen if that's going to be true. But we're going to look into some of the progress that has been made and how you can make it kind of your year of AI agents. So starting out, like we mentioned, the kind of need to define what an AI agent is kind of where we need to start. And in a talk at the AI Engineer Conference, which if you need a link to this, the resources doc that folks will be linking in the chat, you can go watch the whole YouTube video, the keynote that this was screen grab from. But Simon Willison on Twitter basically posted, okay, can we crowdsource a definition of agent in Twitter's classic 280 characters? And you'll see that these responses from some pretty big names in the world of AI are all like pretty different in terms of what they focus on, what they actually define as an agent, and how they kind of characterize this abstract concept that we're kind of all discovering together. So not everyone agrees on what this is. And if you've been on social media, you may have seen quite a few folks basically taking sort of workflows or general automations that we have kind of always had and talked about, throwing a little bit of AI in there and saying, cool, like this is an AI agent now. And so that's why it's helpful kind of at the top here to start out and define what an agent is and sort of what a like AI assisted, workflow, that kind of thing is. So we'll go deeper into actually some of these workflow patterns in our session on Monday, which Sarah mentioned. But at the very basic level of a workflow or a process that uses AI, you have an end-to-end process with this defined set of steps. And now what's really cool is you can throw a generative LLM step in the middle, which means using a model like GPT-4o from OpenAI or Sonnet 4 from Claude, or even any of the Gemini models to give that particular step in the workflow a little bit more flexibility with the sort of inputs it can take, the sort of outputs it can give, and just the kind of work that you can do inside of a defined workflow like this has expanded. But at its core, there's still a beginning, a set of concrete steps that never changes, and an end, right? Going up a little bit more complex than this, you have what we call an agentic workflow, which puts the large language model a little bit more in the driver's seat. Still, the blocks are all defined, the processes and the steps are all defined. But in this case, you're using the flexibility of a large language model to make a decision. So this will be a workflow that we'll dive into pretty deeply on Monday, where we are parsing kind of the entirety of the feed, the post feed from Blue Sky, and retool as a word is a pretty common word and phrase. And so we actually will build a workflow that uses AI to decide whether someone posting the word retool on social media is talking about Retool the company or talking about retooling their fantasy sports lineup or something. So these workflows are a little bit more complex because instead of having to use code or some other condition to do this like if else check, you can basically use a large language model to make these sorts of decisions. But at the core, this workflow is still running from beginning to end, and all of the blocks, whatever branch the large language model decides to go down, all those blocks are already predefined. And so, again, like in my view, this still doesn't necessarily fit the definition of an AI agent. There's no real agency here. We're defining the entire workflow from beginning to end. We are leaning on the large language model a little bit for decision making, but at the core of this, this is a preset flow. Where we start to talk about agents is where the large language model really is now in the driver's seat. And so in this example, we have a large language model at the core of this. It is making a decision on which of the tools it has access to call based on its system prompt and then what the user has asked it for in this particular iteration. So tools might be things like Google Docs or pulling data out of Confluence or taking action in a database or the ability to search the web or create a new file in storage, things like that. So we'll look at a lot of those tools in a minute, but the core of this idea is that the large language model does some reasoning about what step it should take next. It decides which tool will be best to take that action. It calls the tool, the action is taken, it reads the output, and then it loops back and does this whole thing again. We call this reasoning and acting model a sort of React framework, not to be confused with the front end JavaScript framework. But this is a framework that's been pretty prevalent in the world of AI for a while. And the key difference here between some of the workflows that we saw earlier and like we'll look at on Monday versus the agent stuff that we're going to be looking at today is that this loop can kind of execute an arbitrary number of times. The large language model is making the decision as to when the loop has executed enough times to satisfy the initial ask of the user, or we can put guardrails on it to make sure that there's a maximum number of executions, etc. But it's not executing from beginning to end. One execution is not going to look the same as the next necessarily. It might pick tools in a different order. It might pick some tools sometimes and others not at all based on the kinds of things that users are asking it. And this flexibility or this kind of agency is what makes an AI agent very powerful. So these diagrams are kind of a lot to look at maybe, but let's think about if we can simplify this a little bit. So in that same talk that we referenced earlier, the definition that came out from OpenAI and one that I really like is that an AI agent is an application consisting of a model equipped with instructions that guide its behavior, access to tools that extend its capabilities, and all encapsulated in a runtime with a dynamic lifecycle. And that dynamic lifecycle is exactly what we were just talking about. The number of loops that agent will run changes from time to time, right? We don't really know for any given run what's going to happen. And that also makes the live demos that we're going to do today much more exciting, as you'll see. So with all of that sort of background context set, let's actually dive in and look at what building an agent looks like in Retool. So we're going to bounce over here. For those of y'all familiar with Retool, you may recognize most of these navigation items up here at the top, but you'll see we have a new one, agents. And when we go ahead and spin up an agent, we can choose from a template of agents that have already been created. So things like researching your competition online, a scheduling assistant, Google Docs Copilot, et cetera. These are all templates that we have pre-built and are kind of one click available for y'all to use. And if you want to see more sort of use cases like this and others that we feel are pretty powerful, again, that resources doc that I mentioned that folks should be linking in the chat has a list of a bunch of those that you can use. But we're going to start from scratch. And today I'm going to call this my video assistant. So I work with a lot of video content. I make a lot of video content for YouTube and things. And I often get stuck at the brainstorming step. I have an idea. I don't exactly know how I want it to look or what kind of the hook is and all that stuff. So I need some help sometimes brainstorming those type of things. So that's what our video assistant is going to do. So we'll just put the description here. Cool. And we'll go ahead and click create. And so immediately right away, we see that we're brought into the sort of configuration tab for our agent. So if we kind of have an idea of what we already want to build, that's where this configuration assistant comes in handy. Just like any other sort of Copilot experience that you're used to in any other tool, this configuration assistant here, you can just give it a description of what you want your agent to do, and it will spin up instructions for you. It will spin up tools for you, and it will really just do a lot of the work for you. So you can just approve and say, great, we're going to put this agent live. Because we want to kind of go into a little bit more of the details today, we're not going to use the configuration assistant, and we'll go through these things one at a time. So triggers we will get back to in just a minute. But if you remember back from our definition, the first thing that we talked about was an AI agent is a model equipped with instructions, right? So let's deal with both of those things right now. Our instructions tab here, and I'm going to zoom this a little bit so y'all can see a little bit better, is where we can put our prompt. And so I've actually kind of cooking show style pre-written a prompt for us here for this video assistant. But what we want to do is tell the assistant what it's supposed to be doing. So we say, you are an AI video production specialist that creates complete 30-second marketing videos for software companies based on brief concepts. We give it a little bit of information about the capabilities that it will have access to, and then we kind of dive into what we want the workflow to look like. So we want it to do some concept development. We want it to write a script. We then want it to iterate on some of the storyboards, actually create the storyboards, create the images for those, and then eventually, record the voiceover using 11 Labs as a tool. And in the end, we want a final video, which is the storyboards kind of stitched together with the voiceover laid over the top. And that will give us kind of our brainstorm and say, okay, that allows me to kind of see, okay, this idea in its like purest, simplest, shortest form, is it something I feel like is going to resonate when we turn this into a full video? And this whole loop only takes a few minutes to run. And so I can really quickly go through a lot of different concepts and see, just, is this something that I'm going to think is going to be useful to put out either on our Retool YouTube channel or somewhere else. So we give it finally some information about what sort of formats we expect things to be delivered in, and just some general tools for how it should work and guidelines for how it should interact with the user. So those are our instructions. Then, the second piece of that is we move down here and we choose our model. So in this case, we've got GPT-4.1 running, but any of the models that you've configured inside of your Retool account are available to use here. So anything from the three kind of main AI providers, DeepSeek or Llama, if you want to go that route. And if you've set up any other custom providers, those are available here as well. So if you want to dive deeper on models and all things large language model, definitely go back and check out Angelique's session from Monday, where she built a kind of prompt arena, we call it, to help the models compete against each other and help choose the best one. So there's some element to that here too, where, as we'll see as we get into it, evaluating which large language model is going to be best for your particular use case is an important step in actually testing and deploying your agent. So now we've got models and instructions. We'll just take a quick peek here under advanced settings. So here are two things you may just want to be aware of. Temperature is the same as if you've used temperature with any other large language model. The further to the right you drag it, the more quote unquote creative it makes the output of the models. So it allows for a greater sort of deviation in expected response. If you drag it all the way to 0, it will do its best to create the same response from the same input every time. Not always entirely possible, just given the nature of how large language models work. But that is way more deterministic over there on the left-hand side. So we'll leave it at 0.3, which is just the default value. It gives us a little bit of flexibility in how it responds, but hopefully nothing too crazy, because again, this is a live demo, right? So and then max iterations. This is what we talked about earlier. This is sort of a circuit breaker. So if you have an agent that you feel like is just looping a bunch, and it's just kind of spinning its wheels and at some point, kind of getting stuck, you can set this max iterations value here. It's currently set to 10. So that means that sort of reasoning and then acting loop that we talked about can run a maximum of 10 times, right? So because we have a whole script writing step, a bunch of voiceover steps, etc., we're actually going to bump this up a little bit for this agent in particular. But if you have an agent you want to be a little more strict with, that's the case where you can just kind of dial that down and put that guardrail in place. Cool. So that's advanced settings. Let's just go ahead and deploy this for now, just so we get a little bit of a saved version here. And now we need to talk about tools. So like we mentioned, the difference between giving a prompt like this to ChatGPT versus building it into an agent is really the tools that our agent has access to. So we're going to go ahead and add a new tool. And we see that we have a lot of different options here. So number one, under core tools, these are tools that we at Retool, as we were building agents and working on things, have found that we use all the time. And so these are tools that you don't even have to build yourself. They're just pre-configured for you to use, and anything from Google Calendar to Google Docs to Retool Storage if you need to create and store files, Retool Vectors, which we talked about a lot on Tuesday, and searching the web and getting content of a particular web page. So in this case, I think I actually need to include all of these Retool storage tools, because my agent is going to be creating screenshots of storyboards for me, and I need some place to put them. So I'm going to allow it to save and create files in Retool storage. I also wanted to be able to search the web. So the initial step in my prompt that I pasted in earlier basically instructs the agent to go onto the internet and research, concepts similar to my video. So it has a little bit more background on the kind of video that I'm asking it about. And that's super helpful just to establish that context. So I'm going to allow it to search the web as well as get web page content. So if it finds a web page that's interesting, I want it to be able to get the entire contents of that web page. So I'll give it access to all of those predefined tools. I'll just go ahead and add those now. And you can see when I do that, they all show up here under tools. But I'm not quite done there. In addition to the pre-built tools, which we feel like is a really great starting place, part of the kind of ethos of Retool in a way is the ability to customize and build your own tooling, right? So if you're already a Retool user, you may have Retool workflows, which you want to use as tools for your agent. That's exactly what we'll be doing today. So we'll take a look at that in a bit. If you have MCP servers that you want to connect to, anything with a publicly exposed MCP URL, you can connect to. So things like you want to connect to GitHub, or I believe Atlassian has a public MCP server now, things like that. You can automatically add those as tools as well in here without having to do any other configuration. You can use other agents as tools. So as you build out different agents, you can have them interact and work with each other. So for example, we have an agent that does meeting research. So when someone books a call, it basically goes and researches that person online and puts together a Google Doc. I'm also working on an agent that is able to build decks in Google Slides. So you can imagine that once I get both of those working, the meeting preparation agent at some point might decide it wants to build a slide deck, in which case, instead of replicating that entire functionality in my meeting preparation agent, I can just have it call the other agent as a tool, have the other agent help it build a slide deck and pass it back, kind of like, two virtual coworkers in a way. But if none of those options work for you, you can actually also create a completely custom tool as well. And so what this looks like is you give the tool a name, a description. You can optionally require user confirmation. And what this looks like is in the chat interface that we'll look at in just a bit, when the agent decides it wants to call the tool, it will prompt the user and say, I want to call this tool. Here's how I want to call it. Here are the parameters I'm going to use. Can you please approve this? So for things like if you're letting your agent refund customers in Stripe or make sort of irreversible database transactions or things like that, that's probably where you'd want to keep that human in the loop and have that approval, right? So any of the tools that you put together, you can require approval from a user, and we'll look at how that works. And so then parameters, this is where let's just define a tool here. So let's say this is a greeter tool. And what this will do is takes a user's name and returns a custom greeting. So if I said, if I passed in my name here as a parameter, then in my custom tool I would have to do whatever logic I wanted to do and return that user a greeting. So what's cool about this is if you don't want to use workflows or work inside of workflows, you can do something very similar here. So if we click on edit function, we'll see that we have name as a parameter, and as an example I'll just put my name in here. And so instead of having hello world, we'll just say hello, and then our params dot name. So if we test this, right, we should see that because we have Keenan as our example value, we get hello Keenan. We have an extra space in here, it looks like, so we'll fix that. But basically, this allows you to anything you can do in workflows, any sort of resource query, any code stuff that you want to write, calling other workflows, AI actions, or even invoking other agents. You can do all of that stuff in here as a custom tool. So again, you can decide if you're calling long-running APIs or making complex database queries, etc. You can increase the amount of time that the tool is allowed to run. But this is an example of a completely custom tool that you can use to hook up to your agent. So if one of the pre-built tools isn't working for you, this is a kind of way that you can build anything your agent needs, right? So we're going to go ahead and close that out for now. Because like I mentioned, the tools we want to give our agent access to are workflows. So I'm going to click use workflow. And the first one I want to look at is the create voiceover tool. So I'm going to call this create voiceover. And I'm going to say this calls the 11 Labs API to generate a voiceover for a script. And this is an example of a pretty custom tool that I had to build for this workflow specifically. So if we actually dive into the workflow itself, you can see here that it takes a script. This is the kind of script that our agent will generate as an input. Then I've used a bit of a custom AI prompt here to give it all of the documentation for the specific syntax that you can use with 11 Labs. And so I'm using a large language model. In this case, let's see, I believe it's, yeah, GPT 4.1. I'm using GPT 4.1 to basically transform the script that my agent creates into a specific script that's useful for 11 Labs. So this is an example of like really customizing the workflow and making it specific to what we want to use here. I have a little bit of a cleanup script to trim it. I am then calling the 11 Labs API. I'm getting the audio file back, and I'm basically storing that at a public URL. So this workflow returns then that voiceover URL back to our agent, puts it in the agent's context, so the agent knows that okay, now I know where this URL lives, so I can reference it later on. So you'll see here in the workflow, the two parameters that we have are script and folder name. So folder name is the folder where all of our content for this particular agent is living, and script is the actual script that the agent has generated. So all I need to do here is add those same parameters to our tool call. And this is important because the agent itself will look at these parameters, and when it's deciding to call this tool, it will make sure to populate values for these parameters. And that ensures that it's able to kind of seamlessly call the workflow. The workflow gets the parameters that it expects, and then it's able to return the data back to the agent. So the other parameter that we had was folder name. Great, we'll make that required as well. And just because I'm not quite sure how long the API takes to generate on 11 Labs, I'll give this a 60-second timeout. So we'll go ahead and hit save. And you can see now our create voiceover tool is down here in our list. So we've got two more of these that I'll just move through kind of quickly. The other one we have is our generate storyboard frame tool. And you can see if we pop this open, what this does is it takes a prompt from the agent. So our agent is basically designing a prompt for the storyboard frame. It's using Gemini 2.0 Flash to generate a file name for the image based on the prompt. So this is a really good example of when it's not necessarily the right decision to use the same model for everything you're doing. This should be a relatively easy thing for a large language model to do. And therefore, I'm going with a relatively cheap model, and just because I just want to file name very quickly. So I don't need any of the heavy duty reasoning models or anything like that. This model will be both cheaper and faster for this sort of simple task. So while that's happening, this generate image tool is calling the OpenAI API, and it's actually generating my storyboard image in real time based on the prompt that my agent has designed, right? So it's using the latest image model that's present in ChatGPT, which is actually quite good. And so it's generating that image, we're saving it into Retool storage, and then we're returning, the generated image URL. So again, all of this that's being returned from these various tool calls is going into the agent's context, so that when we finally decide to assemble our video all together, it has all the information it needs. It knows where everything lives and how that works. So again, we pass it the prompt and the folder name where it needs to save all the storyboard images. So we will go ahead and do that here. Right, so we'll start from our video. We'll add prompt. We'll say that's required. And then we'll also add folder name. Cool. So that's required as well. And again, this image model does take quite a bit of time to run, so we'll give it a reasonable timeout. Cool. And finally, our create video tool is another workflow that we built. You can see this one has quite a few different steps. And let's take a look at this one. So what this one does is it basically gets all of our various storyboard files from Retool storage. It calculates the length of our voiceover because, again, this is a sort of a little bit of a non-deterministic process. So we've told the agent to aim for a 30-second video concept, but it doesn't have the capability to write a script that's exactly 30 seconds, for example, right? So we do need to calculate, okay, is it actually 31? Is it 29? Because we want to divide the storyboard images evenly across the voiceover. So we're doing a lot of this setup work. We're grabbing all the different images. We're calculating how long the voiceover is. And then we're using this tool called ShotStack, which basically allows us to assemble the images and the voiceover URL as a JSON object, pass it to this API, and then after a little bit of a delay, we actually do get a final sort of generated MP4 video, right? And so we then pass that video URL back to the agent as well, and it's able to use that to format its sort of final output. So again, none of these tools are tools that were built in to the Retool platform. This is not a particular use case that we had envisioned when we built the agents product, but it's something that I personally wanted to do. And because of the flexibility of all these different tools and the ways you can leverage workflows and other things to build them into your agents, we were able to make that happen. So again, we could go ahead and fill out all these steps. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit and show y'all what an actual run of this agent looks like. So we've got this here on our agent's landing page as one of our examples. You can see some of the other ones that I referenced here would be really good to look at. And one of the things I like about all the awesome things that the product team put together for this product is any and all of your agents that you decide to make public, much like you can share a ChatGPT chat, they do have what we call a share interface. So you'll see you get the share.retool.com domain. So your domain isn't leaked here, but you can basically watch the agent work through the solution in real time. So in this example, I said, I want to make a video in a travel vlog style where the main character tries to build an AI agent in Retool before his cross-country flight lands. This is a video concept that I still very much want to execute. And so I wanted my brainstorming agent to help me with that. So you can see that the agent here up front is reasoning. It's thinking about what it wants to do. I'm just going to pause this here actually real quick. So it's doing all of this reasoning up front, and then it's deciding to call its web search tool. So we can expand this and see, okay, this is exactly what it decided to search the web for. it gave us a maximum of 5 results, and we can actually see what the results were that came back, right? So it found this article about 9 travel marketing trends, etc. So you can dive as deep in these tool calls as you want to see actually what's going on. But you can see that it's kind of developing a little bit of an opinion about the approach. It asked me, okay, I'm going to write a 30-second script. And I said, sounds great. Let's see the script. And so it then, did the next step in its loop where it had some more thoughts. And then it said, okay, cool. Here's our 30-second script. And so at any point, I could jump in here and say, no, I want to do this slightly differently, or I want to make this tweak. And it would kind of go back and forth with me on that step. But I feel pretty good about the direction it's going here. And so it defined the 5 different storyboard frames that it wanted to use. And then it actually, is again using various tool calls here. It's creating the folder Retool storage, and then it's actually generating the images. So you can see here's the prompt that it provided. And if we go here, we should be able to see the actual storyboard image that was generated from our image model, right? So it's going through and doing these for all 5 frames. And again, at any point we can dive in here and look at the prompt that it's making, what it's thinking about, etc. So once it gets done doing all of those image generations, it then moves on to the create voiceover step. So we can see it passed it the script here, and then we get this published, voiceover URL. And so again, once it has all of that, it's able to stitch everything together and say, cool, here's our script, here's our voiceover, our notes, and we can see that it's generated these storyboards for us as well. So it should also return, a link to kind of watch this full video. And obviously you can see like there are things to improve on here. This storyboard is a little bit of a different feel than this storyboard. But what I found is it's really efficient to build out these concepts very, very quickly, right? So once we have this agent that kind of works, one of the main ways that we looked at to trigger it, what you were seeing there was basically using this chat interface to interact with your agent, right? And this is something we recommend for testing, like when you're working with it as a prototype. Again, you can see kind of all the tools it's calling, the things over here. But there are a few other options to configure them as well. And this speaks to a question that Kevin had in the chat, actually, where there are these triggers that we mentioned up front, right? So chat is one trigger that obviously is used as kind of the default. We also have email, which in this case means that if I click email, it will define a specific email address for my agent. And this allows me to email this email address, which will trigger, a run of that particular agent. So if you're using like a scheduling agent, for example, and you're going back and forth on email with somebody and you want to kind of just CC your agent, bring them into the loop, get something put on the calendar, you don't have to copy and paste the entire context of that email thread into the agent chat. You can basically have this email address configured. You can CC your agent on the email, and it will take care of all of that scheduling for you if that's how you have had it set up. The other thing that you may have noticed, I'm just going to go over here because this is a workflow we can look at, is that inside of workflows, there's actually a new sort of invoke agent step here. And so what you can do is you can just pick any agent that you have. This is our video assistant agent that we just made. And you can invoke it as part of a workflow block, right? So you need to pass the inputs to your agent like you would expect. So instead of providing an initial chat message, here you would provide the question or what you wanted to invoke your agent with as the content. You can kind of see this placeholder here. And so what this allows you to do is 2 different things. If you haven't used workflows before, first of all, I really encourage you to come to our deep dive session on workflows on Monday. But for the purposes of this, I will tell you that workflows can be triggered both via a schedule. So think, trigger this every 24 hours, trigger this every 10 minutes, either by this interval interface, or if you're comfortable with cron syntax, you can define that here as well. So that allows, agents that run once a day to be wrapped in, a workflow that runs on a schedule and triggers that agent. They can also run in response to a webhook. So this is a great way to trigger an agent from a Slack message, for example. You can have an agent that's part of a workflow. The workflow has a webhook enabled, and then Slack, based on a user message, pings that webhook, triggers the workflow, which passes the context to the agent, etc. And so schedules and webhooks are 2 different ways that you can trigger agents by just wrapping them in a workflow itself. So in addition to chat, you can also use email, but you can also trigger agents on a schedule or in response to a specific event from an external tool by wrapping them in a workflow. One of the things that the team is going to be working on this quarter and shipping as more of a first party feature to agents is kind of building out these sort of triggering features where if all you need to do is have it respond to a webhook, for example, is there a way we can do that directly inside this agent interface without having to wrap it in a workflow? So more to come on that. But right now, there's already a ton of flexibility in how you can actually trigger your agent. So once you have set up your instructions, you've set up your prompt, you picked your model, you've defined your tools, and you have your dynamic runtime here, which is kind of our chat interface, that satisfies the 4 criteria that we talked about earlier in our definition. So what's next? Basically shipping this to production, right? But when you take this sort of autonomous system and decide to ship it into production, there's obviously a fair amount of risk associated with that. So there are a few things that we've done to help you manage that when you're deploying these sorts of systems. So first of all, speaking of, let's go ahead up here and hit deploy. Given that we've made a bunch of changes since we last did that, let's do that. And then let's look at these other 3 tabs here on the right. So number 1, logs. We haven't actually run this agent yet, but what will happen is we can actually look at this one. What will happen here is when you run your agent, you will have a full set of logs here about what happened, what tool calls happened, what information was passed to those tools, etc. So at any point, you can kind of go back and see what's happening with your agent, how it's running, all sorts of things like that. That's great for backward looking things, but you usually want to have some amount of confidence that your agent is running the way you expect. And that's where data sets and evals come in. So when I add a data set, I'm basically just adding a set of conditions that I want to check whether my agent handles correctly. So in this case, I'm going to create a data set called tool usage. And one of the things that's important when you're building agents is to make sure that they're calling the tools they have access to correctly and in a way that you would expect, right? So in this case, I want to make sure, like we mentioned, I want my agent to always do research as its first step, right? I want it to use its web search tool to do what it needs to do. And so in this case, I'm going to define a test case that says, when I ask the agent to help me brainstorm a Retool commercial that can air during the Olympics, right? Let's just say. So this would be the input that I would give my agent. And in this case, what I want to evaluate is whether it chooses the web search tool as its first action, right? So you can see down here, I can tell it exactly what sort of search query I expect or what maximum results I expect. And that's important if you want to create sort of as granular of evals as you can. But let's just leave those blank for now. So I'm going to create this test case, basically saying when I give the agent this input, it should choose, the web search tool, right? And actually, I think I need to go and X these out. This is something that we're still a little bit working on improving here because we do want the flexibility to just like define this a little bit less granular test. But we have that added as a test case, which means now we can go ahead and create an eval. And so I'm just going to call this one run. I'm going to run my tool usage data set. And basically what this will do then is run through all of our different test cases in the data sets that we've selected with our agent, given the prompt and the model that we have. So you can see in this case, it passed, it used the search web tool exactly like we would expect. And, it gives us the fact that, okay, we gave it a 100% score. Here's what it searched for. Here's the maximum results, etc. So you can see this passes. We know that this is going to use our web search tool every time. And this is really useful because once you build up these data sets and these evals, when a new model comes out, for example, you can upgrade the model in your agent and run all your evals before you deploy it to the rest of your organization and know that your agent is still going to work as expected, or maybe even better than you expected, given the new model, and you don't have to worry about things like regressions or sort of unexpected behavior, and you can have that confidence to make changes to the systems while still having the stability of a working, functioning system, right? So evals and data sets are a super powerful way to, once your agents are ready for production, make sure that they continue to work as expected. And we have a lot of additional features coming here too, such as the ability to use a particular chat thread as either a data set or kind of inspiration for an eval. So you'll be able to say things like, this is a really good example of how I want this agent to run, and kind of have tooling to create data sets and evals around that, or vice versa. As this is really a negative response, I don't want to replicate this, and you're able to get some help creating evals that will help your agent avoid that in the future. Cool. So that's kind of end to end, like how we might deploy our first agent. But we mentioned that agents can exist in like context of other agents. We can build this sort of ecosystem of agents, and if we have to kind of click between all of them or just kind of see over here in the sidebar different ones that we have running, it's a little bit difficult to keep track sometimes. And so that's why we've brought the monitoring view into agents as well. And so what this does is basically gives you a very interactive sort of graph here with all of the different agents that you have access to. You can see exactly what they're doing, what tools they're calling, and what's going on in basically real time here. So you get this sort of graph view. Sorry, a little bit of motion sickness there. Where you can see what's going on. You can see over here the tools that your agents are calling. Up here, you can see whether executions of agents were successful, whether there were errors, kind of on a timeline view. You can adjust the granularity of this timeline, et cetera. And then you've also got some stats down here to see, okay, how many tokens am I using? What's this costing? What's the runtime of my agents? What agents are running for the longest amount of time? What agents are being run most frequently? What tools are being called most frequently? And you have this sort of visibility on any example agents as well, right? So you can see here, like Kent's linear agent. We're going to look and see that this is running. It's used this many tokens, and all of this data now is just for this particular agent that's running. So you can use this to get either a very wide or very narrow look at how agents are running on your different systems, which is super useful. So cool. I hope this has been helpful to kind of see how we're thinking about agents at Retool, how we're building them for our own internal use cases, and how we're helping customers and partners build out agents as well. I see that we have quite a few questions coming in. So like I said, I do want to leave some time for that. Got about 20 minutes left. So if you haven't had a chance to leave questions, please do so in the chat, either in the chat or in the Q&A tab. And then pretty shortly here, someone from our team is also going to be dropping a poll in Zoom. We just want kind of a thumbs up, thumbs middle, thumbs down. There it is right there about how you felt about today. Personally, I'm just interested in whether the concepts I brought to y'all are resonating, but that helps us give good data on around whether we bring these types of sessions back, whether we adjust the topic or the focus slightly. So voting in that poll will be greatly appreciated. But cool, we're gonna get to some Q&A, and like I said, don't be shy. Leave anything you have in the chat, and we'll run through them. Cool. Yeah, so we did, like I mentioned, Kevin had a question about, can we kick off agents programmatically, or do we have to manually chat? And there's a lot of flexibility there, right? So you can use the chat. That's kind of the quickest feedback loop, but using workflows to trigger them on a schedule or via a webhook is another option, and triggering them via email is an option as well. Cool. We had a question. What are the best ways to extract email content that is in a table format and unstructured? Does Retool have a built-in for that, or can I build a Retool agent to handle this? Yeah, so email content that's in a table format. So I'm assuming that's like a table in the body of an email. Either way, a table in some sort of text. And I think whether to use an agent for this or just a Retool AI action in an app or in a workflow, for example, is kind of up to how much variability there is in the process and how much variability there is in the input, right? So you can use an AI action to sort of summarize unstructured data, which a table would kind of be in between structured and unstructured, but you can definitely do that. And basically that would allow you to just feed in any amount of sort of arbitrary text, and you would get a text-based summary there. If you feel like there's going to be multiple steps that are sort of needed to, get the data out of the table, kind of reformat it, do a bunch of different things, and those steps aren't as well defined, or they might vary from table to table if you're dealing with different kinds of data, that's where an agent might be really useful. And that's where, kind of at the beginning, we gave this framework of, these different architectures of AI systems, right? And so my general advice to folks is essentially use the simplest one of these three that you can. It gives you a lot more confidence that it's going to work the way you want it to. But if you have a system where the amount of data, the type of data, things like that are quite variable, that's where the flexibility of an AI agent that has access to a lot of different parsing tools and things would come in handy. So yeah, I would recommend just kind of trying out and seeing if you have a workflow that isn't quite getting you the results you need, then that maybe is the time where it makes sense to upgrade to an agent so that it can run multiple times through that loop. For example, we had someone doing something pretty similar where they were trying to pull data out of a bunch of different PDFs, and PDFs are kind of a notorious file format for not being super structured all the time, having weird formatting edge cases and things. And they had built a workflow similar to this, that was only able to get them like maybe 50% accuracy, something like that. But when they upgraded that to an agent and let that agent kind of go back and reinterrogate the data and compare the data that it extracted against the PDF and kind of take those follow-up steps when it was unclear, their accuracy got up much closer to 100%, because it was able to handle that ambiguity of, PDFs are formatted weirdly sometimes. So that's kind of the trial and error of finding an architecture that works for you. But yeah, I would say that Retool has a lot of different tools that can help you with that. It's really just deciding, what sort of complexity and what capabilities you need there. Cool. Yeah, Matt asks, I don't get the database portion of the agent. You need to define all the possible prompts and the appropriate tool for them. And how does that apply to the eval run? Yeah, so let's go back and take a look at that. This is talking about the data sets thing that we looked at the end there. So let's just look at this one. Actually, let's look at the one we created a data set for, right? Yeah, video system. Cool. So we didn't deploy this. That's fine. We'll just make a new one. Yeah, so the question really is, you need to define all the possible prompts and the appropriate tool for them, and how is that applied to the eval run? So you don't necessarily need to define all the possible prompts. This is kind of like if you've ever built a sort of traditional software app and you've written unit tests or functional tests or end-to-end tests, that's where this kind of comes into play. So while there are some sort of ideologies that insist on like you have to have automated tests that cover every single use case, every single edge case, in a lot of cases it's not practical, right? So what I would recommend really is creating test cases as you kind of actually start to use your agent and see the places where it sometimes falls short. I would basically just sort of create test cases to ensure that those situations are working properly, right? So in this case, we mentioned kind of both, unit testing and end-to-end testing. And basically that's where these two types come in. So the tool choice one we already talked about, where we want to give it an input and check that it uses a particular tool. So again, that's like, because one of the problems that agents frequently run into is not selecting the correct tool, especially when they have a bunch to choose from. This is one of the ways that you can kind of verify correctness in an agent's run, is it selecting the tools we would expect for a given input? Again, on the concept of like end-to-end tests, also sometimes what you care about is the final answer of an agent, what the final output is. And so in this case, you can say, I expect the agent to have this exact output, or I expect the agent to always output valid JSON. You can even use another large language model as a judge to say, okay, in this case, my video assistant, I can say like, is the following script, funny and engaging? And in this case, GPT-4o would read the script that my agent put out, and it would decide, is it funny or engaging? It would give it a yes, no, or a maybe score. And this would allow me to see, okay, if a new model comes out and my agent now uses a new model, is it changing the tone or like the core content of what my agent is creating because it has a new model underneath? And again, I'm not going to maybe make these like impossibly rigorous for every sort of potential outcome. But having these test cases here means that when you go to create an eval really is just a particular run through of the test cases. So just like after you deploy an application to production, you might go through manually and like click, make sure this button works, click and make sure the checkout button works, make sure the logo is showing up on the homepage, etc. That sort of checklist that you're manually running through, that's what is happening when you create an eval run. So you're deciding which tests that you've created you want it to run, and then it's using your agent to run through all of those tests, right? So hopefully that's helpful and clarifies this a little bit. But again, I wouldn't be too prescriptive about creating test cases for every possible edge case. But that's also the thing that I mentioned before, where we're trying to make it easier to go from a chat to a test case, and turning a chat into a test case, so that it makes it even easier to create evals when you see functionality you don't quite like, or functionality you do like and you want to replicate. Cool. Jacob asks, when using an agent for a repeatable process, like clicking a button or uploading a document, are there ways to ensure it will perform the same steps each time it is invoked? Is there a better tool to use when the desired action is deterministic? Yeah, good question. And this goes back to what we were just talking about before with these different architectures, right? So if you need a tool that's completely deterministic, that's probably something like this, where it's a workflow. Each step happens one after the other. There's no sort of flexibility or deviation, anything like that. And that's a workflow. Whether it has an AI step in it or not, maybe you don't even need AI in a workflow. But basically, if it's something that can be like turned into code, I often say, okay, that's basically just, a workflow. If you don't want to run it as code, you want to run it as something more visual like this, you may not need AI for that. But where these different architectures come in is where the architecture before it sort of falls short, right? So here in this architecture, there's no possibility for branching, right? So that's where we say, okay, if we need the possibility to go to one path or the other, that's where we know we need an architecture like this. So I would say that if you need more deterministic output, I would recommend, either this very deterministic architecture or this sort of like yes or no sort of setup. But yeah, an agent really excels where there's a lot of that variability and ambiguity. And there's a lot of work that's been put into, obviously, with the evals and things, trying to make agents more deterministic. But if you need that, that's where I would suggest maybe a slightly different architecture, which is one of the two that we mentioned. And so, again, if that's something that interests you, on Monday we will have our workflows deep dive, and so come back and join us, and we'll talk more about that then. Cool. Guy asks, are there additional costs associated with the web search capability of an agent, or is that part of the Retool platform? Yeah, so not right now. The agents, as you may have noticed up here, we've got this beta label on here. We launched agents into public beta just over a month ago, near the end of May. And so we're still kind of seeing how users interact with agents, how they use them, what they're deploying them for, what workflows they're using them to run, et cetera. So right now, the web search tool, as the pre-built tool that we just saw, is built into Retool. There are some usage limits on this, so obviously we're not like letting people build an agent that just kind of spams Google or whatever search engine we're searching on. But we are using Tavily web search as kind of our integration provider there. So you can, at any point, if you run into those usage limits, you can go and sign up for an account with Tavily and bring your own API key into Retool. So that will remove those limits for you, and you will just pay for that kind of usage directly. Cool. Gabrielle asks, can the created agents interact with databases, like, for example, adding or updating records and tables? Yeah, absolutely. So that would be a case where I'm trying to think if any of these agents over here do that. I don't think they do. But what we could do is, we could create a new tool. Say we're going to start fresh, create a custom tool, for example. And then again, in this custom tool, you could have any sort of resource query that you wanted here. So you could call REST APIs. If you have your data stored in Retool database, you can do that. But for example, if you have your data stored in Databricks or in Salesforce or anything like that, you can make those queries here as well. So what sort of input you want the agent to have into how this resource is called is up to you. But a lot of the times, for example, if we have a Salesforce resource and I need to get an object out of Salesforce, I will have my agent write the Salesforce query for me, pass it in as a parameter, and then I will sort of deterministically make the Salesforce call, return the results, etc. So you can do any of that you want to in these custom tools, because the custom tools have all the same tools and capabilities as a workflow. So you can, any of your resources that are configured in Retool, you can call via a custom tool. Cool. Kevin asks, you demoed triggering agents from email. Can the agent respond to that email and have a back and forth thread? Short answer is yes. So when you click email here, we should also see down here, we automatically get the reply to email tool added. And so this allows the agent to, yeah, once it's done executing its run, respond to that email thread. And, responding back to that will kind of update the run and keep the thing going. So this is a way that you can kind of have conversations with your agent and trigger them from an interface that's not this particular agent's interface. And like I mentioned, we're working this quarter and through the end of the year to kind of expand that functionality, both in email and in tools like Slack as well, so that your agents can kind of work where you work and exist where you exist, and you can use them in the way that makes your workflow most seamless. All right. Larry asks, how do you handle authentication into third-party systems, e.g. for tool use? Yeah, it's a good question. So for specific tooling that we already kind of covered, like let's look at this tool that we're just looking at. If I, for example, had actually let's make a new one here. We're getting state sort of mixed up. So if I have any sort of resource that is already connected to Retool, like a Databricks or something like that, a REST API endpoint, whoever set that resource up as hopefully also handled the authentication. That's one of the things about kind of the guardrails that exist in Retool is the folks that own the different systems that you need to connect to can set them up as resources. And then anyone who has access to those resources through Retool's governance tooling can use them in a safe and sophisticated way. That said, anything that inside of this tool or inside of a workflow, any particular API call or things like that, you can also do the authentication in that step. If it's something that's just kind of a one-off use case, and so there are a lot of controls and tooling there for that. If you're talking about something like our MCP integration, for example, you can set up MCP servers as a resource as well. And we are working on getting authentication and all of that baked in more for that sort of thing. So that's something that's coming because right now we really only pretty strongly support like MCPs that are public, but we know that folks have MCPs that are behind paywalls and things like that, or off walls, so that that's a thing that we do want to support in the future. Cool. All right. Let's see. Let's look at another one here. Can you access the logs programmatically or via the database? Yeah, this is something that we are working on kind of opening up access to folks as well. This is, right now we do have the logs that are kind of constrained in this sort of interface. Actually, it looks like we need one that has logs in it in this sort of interface. But we know that again, we want these logs need to live in places where folks actually work. So that's something that we're working on expanding as well. Yeah, cool, good question. I'm gonna stop my screen share here real quick because I need to go find something in the background while I answer some more of these questions. Cool. Are there storage limits on logs? That's Ashley's question. Yeah, so this really depends on a lot of different things. Number one, whether you are on a cloud or a self-hosted plan. But yeah, we have not seen folks hit anywhere near these limits, just because even though agents do produce quite a bit of output, the limits there are pretty large. So that would be something that I would recommend looking at in the docs. I can see if I can track down an answer for you there, but that's again something that I don't think, especially for a lot of this like early experimentation and usage, that you should be as worried about. Cool. Let's get to a couple more. All right. Can you automate a browser session? This is from Larry. Yeah, so good question. This is kind of a yes and no. There are tools that you can use, like MCP tooling, for example, that will interact with sort of a headless browser. And if you're not familiar with the concept of a headless browser, it's basically a software tool that can emulate all the different things a browser does, but there's no like visible sort of interface like you would get when you open Chrome, things like that. So there are ways to handle that via MCP and other things, but we don't currently have a built-in tool to support this in Retool. All right, I want to take maybe one more, and then I want to show y'all. It seems like there's some questions in the chat about whether we can see actually one of these generated videos. So I do want to show that real quick before we jump here. But let's look at one more of these. Yeah, so we have a question from an anonymous attendee about sort of an agent use case where they want to know if a user could upload a receipt, the agent can extract all the information from the receipt, it prompts the user for confirmation and connects it, to another Retool tool or instance or et cetera, completing the transaction. So that to me does sound like a pretty good use case for an agent. The one thing that I would want to clarify is, how much there needs to be a sort of human in the loop in that process. So that might be a good case for an agent that kind of, like we mentioned before, goes back and forth with the user over email. With some of the other kind of back and forth communication things that we're working on, that might be a good use case for that as well. But I think the sort of user communication and keeping them updated on the particular thread that's happening as they're like submitting their receipts and getting them parsed, etc. It would be the potential challenge there, but that definitely does seem like something that's doable. Cool. All right. Yes, we have a few more questions, which again, will Sarah and the community folks will make sure those get into the community thread. As soon as we're done here, I will jump over there and get to work on answering some of those so that folks get all their questions answered. But I did want to show y'all, since there have been some questions about what the generated video actually looks like for this sort of thing. I do want to show one of those real quick. So let me just share my screen again. And I need to find the share my sound. There we go. Perfect. Okay, cool. So this is one where I asked the agent, this is back a couple months ago when the NBA finals was on. I asked the agent to make me a concept for a video about Retool, where, you know, we were going to air this commercial during the NBA finals. And so this is one where I went back and forth with it quite a bit on the script. I had some opinions on the storyboards, etc. But this is the concept that it generated.
Clock's ticking, every second counts. Champions win with teamwork, strategy, and execution, on the court and in business. With Retool, your team can build custom internal tools and automate processes with Retool workflows, so every play is orchestrated for success. No waiting, no limits, just results. Build like champions. Win like champions. Try Retool free today.
So you can see that, you know, it shows a voice for the voiceover, and there's some tweaks and things that could be made. This storyboard frame was the only one that had sort of neon when the other ones were all sketches. And so these are the kinds of things that once you started using this agent and deploying it to production and getting some actual usage on it, you would be able to create, you know, evals, like work on finessing the prompts for these things to get this behavior, you know, even more dialed in. But this whole process from generating the script to me having some opinions on it to going back and forth and generating the final video took probably 4.5 or 5 minutes. And, you know, this really just quickly lets me see, okay, is this a concept that I want to pursue or not? So hopefully that was helpful. Yeah, again, we'll post all the rest of the questions that we didn't get time to answer in the community thread, which Sarah just put in the chat. I just want to say again, thank you all for coming, taking some time on your Friday to hang out with us and explore all this agent stuff. I'm super excited about what the future holds for AI and AI agents specifically. Yeah, and as a reminder, if you want to dive more into the workflows piece, which we showed a little bit today, we'll be looking at a couple of those different workflow architectures and actually building one out live in our session on Monday. So hope to see you all then, and have a good weekend.